good evening and welcome. Tonight we're going to be going over the history and geography of Ukraine. Ukraine, as you can see, is a very large country. It's located in Eastern Europe and it is bordered by quite a lot of countries. Let me move this book. We'll flip through this after we go over the history. So let's see the borders here. We have this very big border with Russia, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. If you know, you know. There's a border here with Romania. This long border with Moldova. There's more Romania here. There's a border with Hungary, Slovakia, Poland, and Belarus. And to the south you can see the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov right here. So even though it's right in the middle of Europe, it has a coastline thanks to the Black Sea. The capital city is Kiev, and as you might be able to tell, this map is a little old. This book's from 2011, so a lot has happened in Ukraine since then. This spelling is considered like a big no-no in Ukraine. If you have to use like the what's it called? Not the Cyrillic, but the like English speaking alphabet, basically. Phonetic alphabet. I don't know. What's it called? Anyway. I've been staring at Ukrainian stuff and Cyrillic alphabet for nonstop. It's kind of weird to see not Cyrillic alphabet, but anyway. Other major cities are Kharkiv over here. We have Odessa along the coast, and Lviv is also a very large city. Besides the Black Sea, one of the big major geographic aspects of Ukraine is this big long river that slices it right in half. This is the Dinipr River. As you can see, it flows right through Kiev. It's got lots of big dammed reservoirs in it. And there are lots of other big rivers in Ukraine. You can see the Dnipr River flowing down through here, coming up from there. We have the, the Desna River. You can see it flows down from here into the Dnipr. So most of Ukraine, basically like most of this region over here, is what's known as a steppe. This is the Eurasian Step. And if you're an American, if you can picture like the Great Plains, like the prairie, it's sort of like that. It's land that is very, very flat as far as the eye can see, but the soil is very, very fertile. It's perfect for farmland. You can see, even though it's just flat land as far as the eye can see, you can see all of the big major cities around. And that's because that flat, plain land is incredibly, incredibly fertile, perfect for farming. There are many different lowland areas in the Eurasian Steppe in Ukraine. You can see the Dinipr lowland, the Black Sea lowland. There's the Pripyat marshes up here. But over here is pretty much where the only big mountainous region of Ukraine is. This is part of the Carpathian Mountains. I did check to see if it was on the map. There it is. That is Mount Hoverland, the highest point in Ukraine. And it's a very beloved mountain in Ukraine. It's almost kind of like a rite of passage for Ukrainians to climb it at least once a year, especially on Independence Day. Very beloved mountain. And right up here is where Pripyat is located. You heard the Pripyat marshes. If you know your obscure history, that is the town near the Chernobyl power plant that was evacuated and has not been inhabited ever since. Everything's been left as it was in 1986 when it was evacuated. It's a very creepy place in the world. And the region around it, most of it is in Belarus, which I talked about in my video about Belarus, but part of it's in Ukraine, is the Chernobyl exclusion zone, where it's considered too radioactive for people to live. There are people that live there, but they're all elderly people who have like family history in that region. And since they're old anyway, you know, whatever. But that region has been taken over by wildlife, and it's pretty much like a big nature reserve at this point. It's very interesting in my opinion. We'll talk a little bit more about it in depth later. But I've got to stop dodging the elephant in the room. You can see Crimea down here. And I know it's pronounced in different parts of the world, like the English-speaking world. Some say Crimea, Crimea, Crimea. It's however you want to say it. I'm pretty sure in America we say Crimea, Crimea, Crimea. Anyway, however you want to pronounce it, it's totally fine. This big peninsula here is a big point of contention, and I'll just get into it now, even though we'll talk about it more in the history. This part of Ukraine has been annexed by Russia. Russia has come in, taken it over, they claim it, so on and so forth. They've even built a big bridge from here up to this city. The line is pretty much right about here or so. I'll try to draw it in with pencil. And I'm filming this in December 2021, where there is Russian military lined up ready to go on this border as we speak. So pretty intense. So you'll find out just what's going on here in its history. So with that out of the way, let's get into it. The history of Ukraine. People have been living here for forever. There's even evidence of Neanderthal habitation in Ukraine. And what's really interesting about early humans in Ukraine is that it's believed that the horse was first domesticated here in Ukraine, out on the steppe, the big wide plains. You'll see pictures of it in here. There were lots of different ancient cultures and kingdoms. The big Neolithic culture was the Pripyat culture, but there were lots of different ancient kingdoms and empires that controlled parts of this area. There were the Cimmerians and the Sarmatians, I think they're called, but the biggest, most powerful one would have been the Scythians, who controlled most of this area, pretty much all the southern area here, between 700 to 200 BCE. All along the coast here, most of the major cities you can see here on the Black Sea coast started off as colonies from the Greeks, later the Romans and the Byzantines. Eventually, once those colonies weakened over time, there were invasions by the Huns and the Khazar people. But the first real big power to dominate this entire region would have been Kievan Rus, and they had done so by the 10th century CE. As you can tell by the name, they were centered in Kiev. And one of their biggest contributions, other than taking over the region, implementing their culture, was that Christianity was introduced by one of their kings, Vladimir the Great, and his son Yaroslav the Wise is considered like the big, most important king next to Vladimir, because he did a lot to really strengthen the kingdom. But after his rule and a couple of rulers after him, Kievan Rus started to weaken, and it definitely crumbled in the 13th century when the Mongols invaded. They went through and destroyed everything. They were a scorched earth kind of people. Just destroy everything and then take it over. That's their policy. There we go. Eventually, the different shattered kingdoms in the area came back together. The area was known as Ruthenia, which is eventually how Russia gets its name. This would have been the early version of Russia. In the 14th century, Lithuania invaded. If you see my Lithuania video, they were once the largest, in terms of area, country in Europe. So they came in, took over, and in 1569, Lithuania and Poland joined together to form the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which you can learn why when you see my Lithuania video. So then Ukraine, or most of what is Ukraine today, became part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, mainly dominated by like Polish culture, what have you. The biggest conflict with that would have been that this region was very Orthodox Christianity. They have their own version of Orthodox. Basically, it's Ukrainian Orthodox. It's pretty much how it's known today. It has its differences from Russian Orthodox and Greek Orthodox. But the Poles and Lithuanians were Roman Catholic, so there was a lot of clashing in terms of that. Not to mention there was a lot of persecution from the peasants, being treated as basically slaves under a serfdom economy, so to say. A lot of people fled out into the wilderness and formed their own army known as the Cossacks. And they were very vicious fighters, very intense, and they fought back against all the powers that were against them, so to say, and with the ultimate goal to create their own Cossack state. Meanwhile, just an aside, down here in Crimea, I guess a kingdom, it was the Crimean Khanate, and the people there were the Tatars, and I believe, I didn't look into it too much, but I'm pretty sure that they were like the descendants of the Mongols that came by, like down the line, mixing with the cultures, you know. And they led slave raids against the Russians and the Ukrainians, as it's known today. They were very disliked. The Cossacks fought against them as well to keep them from kidnapping people and selling them into slavery. That would be a big thing. Just hold on to that for a minute. Just know that that's there. 1648 was the biggest Cossack uprising, which would lead to their ultimate goal. They created the Cossack Hetmanate. A hetman is the same thing as a headman or a chief, leader, king, so on and so forth. So it was the Hetmanate. But they weren't in power for very long. There was a huge battle in 1651 where the Cossacks lost big time. So they went to their nearest neighbors that were like them, the Russians. Because, you know, the Russians also have Orthodox religion and a lot of shared culture at that time. So they said, hey, Russia, can you help us out? You guys are pretty powerful. You're really getting up there. Could you help us? And Russia was like, yes, we can. But you have to swear loyalty to the Tsar. I think at this time it was Peter the Great, or would have been Catherine. I think it was Peter at this time. Yeah, 16, yeah. Anyway, definitely. What am I saying? Definitely Peter. So, Russia came in to help out, and it turned into a very disastrous conflict. The period between 1657 and 1686 was known as the Ruin. It was basically an all-out war between Russia, Poland, the Crimean Khanate, the Ottomans down here at the other end of the Black Sea, and the Cossacks, all fighting each other for control of this region. It was a big mess. The victims were the people just living their lives out on the farms, the serfs who couldn't leave their masters' farmlands and all that. In 1709, it got too much. The hetman of the Cossacks defected to Sweden. Russia and Sweden went to war in the early 1700s called the Great Northern War. But Russia won that war. They beat Sweden pretty bad. And eventually, Russia just absorbed all of it. They abolished the hetmanate in 1764. They fought the Crimean Khanate and annexed it for the first time in 1783. It became part of Russia. And even though this was like its own thing, it was called Little Russia. They implemented a lot of Russification, but there was a moment in the 1800s where there was a big Ukrainian romanticism movement in terms of literature, poetry, music, theater, dance, all the wonderful aspects of culture. The most important person in this time, according to Ukrainians, like by far the most important, was a man named Taras Shevchenko. He was a serf, but his masters realized at a young age that he was a very gifted artist, so they bought his freedom, sent him off to art school. He became an artist and a poet and a novelist, and wrote and painted and all of that about Ukraine and how it should be its own thing, separate from Russia, free from all of the oppressive control that it was under. And he's still extremely beloved to this day. Flash forward to World War I. Of course, Ukraine would have sided with Russia during World War I. However, in 1917, the Russian Tsar was taken out of power during the Russian Revolution. It was essentially chaos up there, so Ukraine's like, cool, we're going to declare independence, and we're the Ukrainian People's Republic. But it wasn't these borders that you see. A lot of the west here was part of Poland. This area declared its own independence called Western Ukraine. There was a Southern Ukraine. There were a lot of different regions of Ukraine declared its independence. And a civil war broke out among, I think it was, Southern Ukraine against the Ukrainian People's Republic, and Western Ukraine, they wanted anarchy. So it was a kind of rough civil war that really weakened everything. In 1922, right? Oh, I didn't write down the year. I believe so. Western Ukraine got absorbed into Poland, right? Poland? Yeah, Poland. And the rest of it joined the Soviet Union. Russia stepped in to, help out / take over the area. And the biggest plan of the Soviet Union that Stalin implemented was collectivization. It was part of his 5-year plan, where all the farms would be owned by the government, of course, because it was a communist government. Everything's owned by the government. And they were told what to farm, how to farm it, when to farm it, and the government would take the food and distribute it throughout the Soviet Union. But a lot of Ukrainians wound up starving. It was a really rough famine. It's known as the Holodomor in Ukraine. In 2010, basically the Ukrainian government declared it a genocide, just purposefully punishing these people by taking all of their food and leaving them to starve in a way. But anyway, as you can imagine, it was a rough time. But it gets even rougher. On June 22nd, 1941, it's World War II, the Germans invaded. And the Germans did, as you can imagine, what the Nazi Germans did to the Jewish population, Romani population, and of course, people who rose up against them. There was a huge, huge resistance movement against the Nazis in Ukraine. It was a big back and forth. Eventually, of course, the Soviets would have came in to save the day. But many, many cities and towns throughout Ukraine were completely destroyed during this time. So, World War II is over now. This is part of the Soviet Union again. And during the whole reshuffling period, I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty details of it. In 1954, Russia transferred Crimea back to Ukraine. That's important. Just know that. This period of Ukrainian history saw a lot of factories being built. Therefore, there was a lot of manufacturing. Times started to get pretty much better, as good as they could get in the USSR, especially when one of the leaders of the USSR was from Ukraine. He was Leonid Brezhnev, so he centered a lot of his attention on Ukraine. However, on April 26, 1986, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded during a test, and it spread radioactivity all over the place. Honestly, it was detected as far as Sweden. And that was a big embarrassment to the USSR. They did pretty much all they could do to cover it up, which only led to people suffering even more. I've already recorded the rest of the Ukraine videos, but I mentioned it then. I have like a very strange fascination with historical disasters, and Titanic being my most favorite, but like number 2 is Chernobyl. So I know way too much about Chernobyl. I'm really trying to hold myself back from just diving in. But on my memberships, I have a podcast. It's kind of on hiatus during the holiday season right now, but it will come back very, very soon. I did an episode about Chernobyl where you can hear me go on and on in a much more relaxing ASMR voice about my obsession with Chernobyl. So you can check that out there. It's only 99 cents a month to be a member. I upload there all the time. So anyway, the 1990s happened. The USSR is crumbling. A lot of peace demonstrations were happening throughout the countries within the Soviet Union, including Ukraine. On August 24th, 1991, Ukraine declared its independence. And it was a rough start throughout the early 90s. There was a lot of corruption in the government that led to a real slowdown in the economy, a recession. It did eventually get better toward the end of the 1990s. But in 2004, there was an election, and the winner was accused of election fraud, especially when the opposition candidate was poisoned. There was a huge protest against him. It was known as the Orange Revolution, because that's the color of the opposing political party. And that led to that opposition candidate becoming president. There was another big protest from late 2013 to early 2014. It's known as the Euromaidan protest. And that was when the current president, not that former president, I'm not going to bother with names because I'd probably butcher them anyway. Apologies. There was a movement to get Ukraine more involved with the European Union. So as you can imagine, there is a large Russian population within Ukraine, being so close to Russia and so historically linked with Russia, right? So a lot of people wanted closer ties with Russian politics, but also a lot of Ukrainians wanted closer ties with European politics. So when the president started having talks with the EU and then backtracked on it, a lot of people protested that because they did not want Russia to come in and absorb them again, like they have done so many times throughout history, as you can imagine. This led to the president being removed by parliament after all those protests. It also led to Putin, the president here in Russia, deciding to annex Crimea on February 23rd, 2014. Just marched on in and said, we control this now. And that's mainly apparent, according to Russia, due to the fact that most of the Russians in Ukraine live in this area. So while there was all this protest and turmoil, and it would turn violent occasionally, not horrifically so, but just enough to be unsettling, Russia was like, we're going to help the Russians in Crimea and make this part of Russia again. And they led a referendum a month later to the people here in Crimea asking if they wanted to join Russia, and 97% said yes, apparently. So Russia said, we're here to stay. A lot of countries don't recognize the annexation of Crimea. A lot of countries, basically only the ones with close ties to Russia, do. And it's been pretty intense. Ukraine obviously has not recognized it. They say it's super illegal. Many Ukrainians still consider Crimea part of Ukraine. And it's pretty intense. There's been a lot of tension when it comes to Crimea and Ukraine and Russia. Sometimes violent, sometimes threatening, and especially now. So like I said, it's December 2021. The tensions are coming to a head again. Russia seems to be preparing to invade Ukraine, literally right now as we speak. A lot of countries condone it. A lot of countries, China, literally the day I'm filming, China's decided to support Russia. And I read an article like, is this the start of World War III? Yikes. Like, let's not hope so. Let's just hope that, there's been a lot of moments where tensions between Russia and Ukraine have come to a head in terms of Crimea. Let's just hope this is another one that once the heat dies down, it just goes back to being an uncomfortable topic and not a point of war. We don't know what will happen. I don't know what's going to happen. What I want to happen is that everyone lives peaceful, happy, and safe, long lives. And not get involved in any kind of conflict for any reason. That's all I have to say on it. That's my personal opinion. So anyway, that being said, let's get into this book. You can see beautiful churches here. This is like the big famous Saint Sophia Church. Let's learn more about Ukraine. This is a hutsel. That's one of the words I was trying to think of it, but I couldn't in time. One of the regions that declared independence in 1917 was the Hutsal Republic. So this man is of Hutsal origin, sort of like a countryside people, as you can tell, very traditional. So this is a statue of Taras Shevchenko. This is in Lviv, it says. And the six-fingered man is here also, apparently. My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. Anyway. I mean, does he not look... Anyway. Here's a political map of Ukraine. You can see Crimea annexed by Russia. All the borders here and all the major cities. Even Chernobyl's right there. The countryside. So this is more in the west. So you can see the big mountains. Yep, this is a protest, obviously. And this is another picture of Lviv. Very picturesque, beautiful city on the steppe. Flat as far as the eye can see, but incredibly fertile. A good picture of what it looks like. Just grassland as far as the eye can see. You can tell this is like why they domesticated the horse in this region, because you could just ride forever. Up in the mountains, of course, there's lots of skiing. Here's a political map. So this is great. You can see the Eurasian Step. All of the upland up here, the higher parts, the lowlands, the plains, the plateaus. It's a very flat country, except for over here, where there are the mountains. Wetlands and farms, as flat as far as the eye can see. Very fertile. And this is on Mount Hoverland. They brought their flag with them. Here's the very beautiful Black Sea coast in Crimea. It's a lovely place. So Crimea was always like the big vacation spot for Ukrainians and Russians. Nicholas II, the last Tsar, even built a big summer house there. And it's like a very beautiful, lovely place. Let's look at all this is going on. This is Kiev. You can see the Dinipr River. And let's see, this is in Kharkiv, and this is in Odessa. Shoveling some snow, and lots of big factories, and beautiful forests. Oh, isn't that mysterious and beautiful? I love it. Look at the wildlife here. We've got flamingos, we got swans, we got ducks. Beautiful forest ironwood. If you know your Animal Crossing, that's where ironwood comes from. Beautiful wildflowers. These are some poppies. Bee eaters. They're eating some bees. The European bison. There's a horse. This talks about how horses were domesticated here. Here's a very sweet stoat. Sort of like a weasel, like a vole. Here's some pottery from the Pripyat culture. Early cultures, so I can see the green here was the Scythians, right? Yes. The orange was the Sarmatians. And here we can see Yaroslav the Wise, a very important king. Here's a map of Kievan Rus by 1100, very large area. And here's a map of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, another very large area. So this is one of the famous Cossacks. This is Bohdan Khmelnytsky. And yeah, here's another one, Ivan Mazepa. He was that hetman that turned to Sweden for help and wound up losing horribly. Cossack battle. And this is after a pogrom where the Russians would remove a lot of Jewish people from their homes forcefully. destroy their businesses, what have you. Working on the farms. And this is from the movie Battleship Potemkin, which is a true story where let me just read it. It's a Russian film? Yeah, because it was 1925. That was about the ship, the Potemkin, that mutinied and sailed to Odessa, and it was Russian soldiers, right? Yeah, who died under Tsarist fire, where the Tsar soldiers fired on them as they celebrated their mutiny on the ship and killed them all. There's Lenin, the Leninist, I was about to say, the communist leader of Russia. The Soviet Union in 1989, before it all collapsed. That was when I started studying geography as a little kid, when I got really into it. So this is what I knew. And then I was kind of heartbroken when it all fell apart and I had to memorize like 13 new countries. I was a sad little kid, but it was obviously for good reason. So here's some collectivization happening on the farm. They're making sure that all the farmers are working to their proper quota. And here's all their food being taken away. And here are the people starving during the Holodomor Great Famine. Soviets fighting the Germans in a village. This is to commemorate a place where many Jewish people were slaughtered by the Nazi Germans. They have a ceremony every year in memory. A Soviet parade. There's Mr. Lenin again. Sorry, Comrade Lenin. Nikita Khrushchev, one of the leaders of the Soviet Union in Ukraine. Here is the Chernobyl reactor that exploded. I was about to get into it. Anyway, I'm not going to get into it. And the wildlife sanctuary out in the nuclear exclusion zone. Well, officially, unofficially a wildlife sanctuary, right? Gorbachev. It's him right there. Talking in Lviv. And a protest in 91. There's Comrade Lenin again with some blood on him. She's got her goat in the town. And this is from the Orange Revolution. As you can see, this babushka is really fired up about it. And this is in 2013, the Euromaidan protest. This is Yulia Tymoshenko. She campaigned for president and lost, but wound up becoming prime minister. Fireworks, Independence Day. This guy's voting. Here's the flag. Let's read about it. The Ukrainian flag is divided evenly into two bands, one blue and one yellow. The blue upper half represents Ukraine's blue skies, and the yellow lower half signifies the nation's fields of yellow wheat. Sometimes the national flag is flown vertically on public buildings, usually alongside a local flag. When the flag is flown vertically, the blue portion is always closest to the staff. The current flag was adopted by the Ukrainian National Republic in 1918. After the Soviet Union took over in 1922, the national flag was no longer flown. The flag became the official flag of Ukraine once again in 1992. This was the president at the time this book came out, Petro Poroshenko. The newest president was elected in 2019. He was actually like a TV comedian, sort of like the Trevor Noah of Ukraine, and now he's president. He went from mocking the president to becoming the president. This is Parliament. Waving the flags. These are Supreme Court judges. And this is the mayor of Kiev at the time this book came out. It says he was a world champion boxer. And here's some beautiful pictures of Kiev. It seems like such a beautiful city. So I believe this is the Maidan Square, isn't it? So it's like the city's central gathering place. It's the Independence Square is what it means. And yeah, here's a big map of it. Down here you can see the river dominating it and all of the important buildings right there. Some fresh produce, yum yum. Here's their currency. It's the hryvnia, which they adopted in the late 1990s to help their economic recovery after becoming independent. This guy's making airplane engines. Wow. And they've got a lot of watermelons. My goodness, have you ever seen so many watermelons? Here's some sunflowers. It says Ukraine's the world's leading exporter of sunflower oil. A resources map. You can see all of the farmland. So much farmland. Ooh, they're making some iron ore here. And this is a billionaire from Ukraine, Rinat Akhmetov. Beautiful city. This is Lviv again. So these are the Tatars. So, like I said, you know, they have that long history, right? And the Russians persecuted them, especially during the Soviet era, like extremely harshly. It was really bad. So there's a lot of, like, they're still considered like a, what's it called, like a subjugated people, like a persecuted ethnic group within Ukraine still. These people are protesting in support of Russian becoming an official language. And here are some more Hutzel people. This looks like a wedding, I suppose. It's very beautiful. Ukrainian folk dancer and a population map. So you can really see just a lot of people living all throughout Ukraine, especially in the major city areas, not in the mountains, not in the exclusion zone. Here's a good example of Cyrillic that they use, their alphabet. And it's a sweet picture, looks like father and daughter. Church service. Wow. A very old statue. I wonder if he was like, who is this? Dubno. Anyway, here's Vladimir the Great promoting Christianity. And this was his grandmother, Princess Olga, who also became a saint. One of the traditions in the Orthodox belief is what we call in America a polar bear dive or a polar bear dip, where during the winter, this is during Epiphany, you jump in the ice cold water. Another tradition, jumping over the fire on the midsummer celebration of Ivana Kupala. The Cathedral of St. George. And this is the Metropolitan. I believe that's the name of the head of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. And here is a service ongoing. It says they're singing Christmas carols, I believe it. Here's a sweet lady with her Easter eggs. They're really into the extremely decorative eggs in that part of Europe. An Easter Mass. And these priests are praying during the 2014 protest. You can see the police there ready to fight back against any protesters, and it's a nice calm moment of peace and prayer. Here are some Jews who are at a grave of Rabbi Nachman. Nachman, I'm not sure. This is a prominent Jewish leader. And some Muslim Tatars during a service at a mosque in Kharkiv, it says. Very spirited dance. A very old Bible. I love old religious texts like that. They're so cool to look at. So, a statue of an author, correct? Oh, folk songs, fables, poems, so on and so forth. I feel like I'm going to butcher his name. I don't want to try. Here's another one. This is Ivan Kotylyarevsky. And that's easier to say, Nikolai Gogol, very beloved folk writer. Another very famous poet, Lesia Ukrainia. And Valery Shevchuk, another author. A beautiful fresco painted on the walls of the church. Here's a very beautiful mosaic made out of little tiles. And this is an icon, which in the Orthodox Church they have like tiny pictures that they keep around the altar, and this is one of them. Looks like the Virgin Mary. Is it? Does it say? No. Okay, that's what it looks like. Some modern art here. Very emotional statue. The Carol of the Bells. That song comes from Ukraine. And there's some more Ukrainian folk dancers being very spirited. And these people were known as Kobzari. They were sort of like traveling minstrels back in the day, but they were very heavily persecuted. Of course, soccer is a huge sport. A big Lionel Messi fan right there. Of course, winter sports are pretty big in Ukraine. You can see some Olympic skiers there. And of course, gymnastics are a very beloved sport. Oh, how nice. Oh, it says soldiers handing out flowers at a military base on Mother's Day. Oh, that's nice. They're waiting for the bus stop. We got some bread here at the bakery. We've got some borscht. Let's see if it talks about borscht here. No two cooks make borscht in quite the same way, but it's usually beets, cabbage, and beef. It can be served cold or hot. With some rye bread there, and there's some very yummy potato pancakes. Yum, yum, yum. Some soldiers getting ready for a parade and a wedding. Working hard in school. Working very hard in school. My goodness, that's intense. She knows the answer, right? And celebrating Christmas. And that's the end of our book for tonight. Thank you so much for watching. I really do hope that you found this relaxing and educational. And like I said, I do have a couple of Ukrainian themed videos coming up in the next couple of days, so subscribe if you don't want to miss those. And I hope that you have a very good night.